Hello, Internet. It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons, and today I'm back with another player profile, this time going a little bit on the negative side. We're going to talk about everybody's favorite, the rules lawyer. See you on the other side. So, the rules lawyer. This guy is, in a lot of ways, I think the rules lawyer is a little misunderstood, because rules lawyer is really more of a mentality than it is even really a player type or a way that somebody plays tabletop games. The reason I say this is because there's not really any lawyer to the rules lawyer. Because every tabletop role-playing game says the same thing at the outset. It says the number one rule, what we call Rule 0, is the discretion of the game master. He makes all the final calls. He makes all the rules, all the rules arbitrations. He makes all of the decisions. And, I mean, even in the very first edition of Dungeons & Dragons, Gary Gygax wrote in the original Dungeon Master's Guide, and I believe in the original Player's Handbook, that if you don't like a rule, throw it out. If you like something different, replace it. Feel free to change anything to work for your table. So you can't really be a, quote, rules lawyer following the strict letter rule is written when the first rule written is DM gets to change everything they want. Game Master gets to change whatever they want for whatever reason. Now, I've got a whole series on Rule 0. I'm actually in the process of reshooting it for better audio quality. And Rule 0 is something that is one of those great power, great responsibility situations, because your Dungeon Master, Game Master has to use kind of a delicate hand and, some consistency to make a good game that everybody can enjoy. But at the end of the day, a rules lawyer's entire case gets thrown out on the basis that I'm the game master. So when I say the rules lawyer is a mentality, what I'm referring to is this is not the guy who wants to have a discussion with you about the particulars of how a spell works, or who wants to maybe argue his case, where you say you're going to make one ruling and he wants to argue that case a little bit and kind of put up for his side to see if he can make it work. That's just a good player. That's a player thinking outside the box. That's creativity that needs to be rewarded. And that is a situation where a discussion can be had. Now, it can't get out of hand. You got to be able to say, hey, we're going to take this discussion offline. We'll have this discussion not in the middle of the session. But for right now, this is my ruling in this particular situation. It's because you eventually just have to make a call so that the game can continue flowing. You don't want it to break down into an argument. But a lot of what makes you a rules lawyer versus just somebody who is arguing passionately for their idea is intent. The rules lawyer, to me, and I say this with all respect and no shade being thrown towards the channel, The Rules Lawyer. He actually puts out some really good content, seems like a cool guy, and I doubt he does any of this. But when I say rules lawyer, what I'm talking about is that player who is not arguing rules as written out of good faith, or who is arguing for a ruling in good faith because he's come up with an idea or something. When I say rules lawyer, I'm talking about somebody who is trying to get a weasel word loophole out of the explicit language used in a book somewhere to gain an unfair advantage. This is to the min-maxer or the optimizer, or this is what the munchkin is to the min-maxer or the optimizer. So, a munchkin, as we know them, is the kind of person who tries to exploit things and tries to overly weight things to gain some kind of unfair advantage in the game. Often taking very liberal interpretations of how certain feats work and very literal interpretations of how other ones work in order to try and make some kind of super character. Rules lawyer is part of the same thing. This guy is not coming to you to have a discussion about how a rule should be interpreted or about a way to make the game more fun or more logical or more realistic or more lived in or whatever. This guy's coming to you trying to argue a specific instance in order to gain an instantaneous advantage. He wants to argue that monsters don't get critical hits. He wants to argue that a villain that works for a megacorp has too much cyberware and there's no way he could have any humanity yet, so he should be a cyber psycho and therefore shouldn't be working for the corporate leader that y'all are trying to assassinate. He will conversely make the opposite argument that he should be able to, specifically as it's written, this piece of cyberware has a restorative effect on empathy and humanity and therefore should give him the empathy and humanity necessary to add another piece of cyberware before he goes cyber psycho. So he's very contradictory. Just the only consistency is it benefits him and it benefits his character. You will never see the rules lawyer stepping in to argue why something should go against another player or should go against somebody else, that is detrimental to his position. It will always be, this is something that is going to improve my game. It's going to improve my character's position. It's going to give me an unfair advantage. It's the tabletop equivalent of that MMORPG video game player who finds the exploit and uses it. And it's like, man, this guy always has these powerful characters. It's like, well, that's because this guy, all he does is find the exploit. He finds the broken spell. He finds the ability that doesn't work as it's intended. And because the code allows him to do something by putting a couple of things together that normally wouldn't work, it causes an exploit that makes his enemies have zero defense. It's not in the spirit of the game. It's going to get patched out eventually in the case of the MMORPG. And in the case of the tabletop game, you've got to patch it out as the game master or the GM. You just can't allow them to dominate your table with the argument. So how do you handle the rules lawyer? The guy who comes in who is always trying to get a weasel word, quote unquote, legal loophole in the rules to gain some kind of advantage at your table that really just kind of breaks the fun for everybody. How do you handle this guy? Well, the first way you handle him is the way you handle any rules lawyer, any classic person who wants to argue too vehemently against a ruling. Hey, game master's discretion, rule 0, man. My table, my rule. We can have a discussion about it later, but in this instance, it's going to be this rule. I'll explain my ruling to everybody. Which is another part of how you have to handle these guys, is when you make a ruling, you may not have to be able to do it right then and there, but you have to be able to explain to the table why you made a particular ruling. That way nobody feels like you're trying to pick on that one person, pick on that rules lawyer, whatever the case may be. You're not singling him out just arbitrarily. You have a reason for it, you have a ruling behind it, whatever the case may be. So that's a key part. If the rules lawyer continues to want to try and weasel around and exploit, continue to argue, cause dissension at the table by talking to other players about how you cheated him, you made a bad rule, you're a bad GM because you clearly don't know what the rules say, whatever the case may be. At that point, the only thing you can really do with the rules lawyer is you can set them down and you can say, look, here's the deal, I'm not going to have this at my table. If you continue to do this, you're no longer going to be welcome here. It's one of those harsh realities of being a game master. Sometimes you have to make that call. None of us want to kick it to a player from the table, but if it goes beyond the simple arguing with you at the table, you may have to have that discussion. And the good news is that from my experience, most of your true rules lawyer types, the ones who are trying to gain some advantage, trying to exploit some loophole, trying to argue about some esoteric interpretation of the literal definition of what's in the book, generally once you show them that is not going to fly at your table, that you're just not going to allow it, they're either going to leave on their own or they're just going to straighten up and fly right. One of my favorite players was a rules lawyer to begin with, and Really, all we had to do was say, hey, look, this is not a video game. These are not hard, fast coding rules that you can exploit the program. I am the matrix. I am the programmer. I am the one that I am what divides by zero in this game world, and therefore I can go in and on the fly rewrite things to make it work. That's the only way tabletop role playing games work, is with the game master being able to go in and make those calls. And he straightened up and didn't have a problem with that moving forward, and stopped trying to be exploitative. And instead of being exploitative, he ended up being extraordinarily creative, because he realized, I'm not going to be able to exploit the rules as written, but what I can do is try and dig through different classes and different sets of abilities and different play styles to see if I can make something truly unique that's unexpected and gains an advantage in the fact that it's being used in a way that people didn't think of before, which is something that, as I've said in the past, needs to be rewarded. So that's what I'm looking at when we're talking about the player profile of the rules lawyer. The rules lawyer is the guy who is trying to make some kind of semantic exploit out of the rules and is going to argue that case, is arguing that case in bad faith, attempting to gain an advantage, not attempting to make a rational case or to improve the game as a whole or to improve everybody's enjoyment or even really anybody's enjoyment but their own. And the rules lawyer has to be looked out for. There's a couple of ways to handle him, but as a general rule of thumb, that's what I mean when I say rules lawyer, and he is not somebody that you want at your table as long as he continues his loophole and exploitative behavior. Tell me what you think down below, some rules lawyers you've had at your table. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.